Thank you very much. How are you? I hope we can bring some color into the debate today. So my name is Mikolaj Sekutowicz. I'm the CEO and founder of Impact One, and I'm also member of Therme Group's board. Therme Group is a big well-being leader, building city infrastructure for well-being, but also investing a lot in art and now also on the blockchain. And without further ado, I would like to introduce properly my panel. So first, Nabyl Charania. Big round of applause. Nabyl is a serial entrepreneur with multiple exits and has seeded several successful companies as well as private investment funds with outstanding returns. Sit down, my friend, here. This is your place. Perfect. And then next is Afrodet Zuri, independent curator and key advisor here to NFT Now. Please, a big round of applause. And then last but not least, Marc Spiegler. Marc, that headed for 15 years Art Basel, brought Art Basel to Miami and then to Hong Kong. Big round of applause for Marc Spiegler. So it's great to be here and to see how you guys created basically a whole new world through the crypto NFT blockchain, and how this is also influencing our world, the traditional art and culture world. And this panel, in a way, is basically a nice mix of this both worlds that we believe can come together in the utmost beneficial way for both sides. We want to show you a project that, some projects that we curated and commissioned from Refik Anadol, and I will do a short introduction about this. This project you can see right now outside in the temple area, in the historical area of the Schiller Hotel. It's a sense of healing of Refik Anadol. It's not only a beautiful work of art, but it's also a work with purpose. It's called Sense of Healing because this work is illustrating with neuroscience data different states of the human mind and its healing. So this work is a part of our mental health initiative Mind that we have together with the neuroscience leader Mind Maze. But it's not only this, it's also an artwork that has a museum quality. So Refik Anadol right now is on the view in a record-breaking exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. So this work is a big data sculpture comparable to other sculptures and artworks. And then the third, last but not least part, it is also an NFT. And it's an NFT that broke several records. The last record was 1.7 million at an auction, and you can see here some of the different chapters of the work. It's an edition of 20 each. And what this work is illustrating is that if art, if museum quality art and blockchain comes together, we are creating value, and I will talk a little bit about this in my introduction. The next work that you are seeing here, it's a very fresh commission. We commissioned Refik Anadol to co-create with the indigenous community of the Yawanawa from Brazil, from the Amazonian rainforest in Acre, a work that they co-created basically. And this work is an edition of 3 big works, 7 meters high on the right side, and then 1,000 NFTs. It's a drop that we have started only recently that was every single batch was sold out, and you can see here on the OpenSea from today we have a floor price of 11.79 ETH, but we started with 1.5. Yes, so it's probably the most successful art drop of this year, and the reason why, again, because it came with meaning, with purpose, and with a high art approach, but also utilizing in our opinion, most optimal way, the functionality of the blockchain. And then I want to show you the Runaway Nurse from Richard Prince. And you can see here, this is a work that was acquired for the Pisces collection by Simon de Pury in the year 2002 for 35,000 US dollar was the acquisition price, and then it was sold at Sotheby's auction in Hong Kong for 12 million US dollar in 2021. So you can see here how much traditional art can also contribute to a value appreciation. And yeah, last but not least, you are seeing the sense of healing from Refik Anadol with a photo that was taken today in the courtyard of the Schiller Hotel. So Nabyl, we co-invested together with Metaphor Capital, what is your regulated crypto fund, in the sense of healing and also in other works that are basically matching this quality of creation that we are aiming for. Let me know, what is your take from the perspective of a early crypto investor on this new marriage between the conventional, traditional art world and crypto?
Yeah, thanks, Mikolaj. I think for me, this was an awakening moment. For me personally, was never in the art scene, right? I was always in the technology scene or the blockchain scene. But for the first time, I could see that this was something that was culture defining, or like a moment in history where there was a transition from something that only belonged to a few people who knew the art world to something that now became available to everybody because of the democratization process of the blockchain and what Refik was able to do to build it basically as a native cryptocurrency project. So, I think for me and our thesis, it was very, very simple, right? Like the same way you would evaluate technology, or you would evaluate the founders, you would evaluate the market, there was finally a very easy transition to say, I can evaluate the artist, I can evaluate the technology he's built on, and I can see what we call in the tech world, the TAM, or the total addressable market. Here, the TAM is global. Everybody deserves to see this piece, right, from Refik. And so, I think for me, there was a moment where there was a very clear transition to say this is finally something that everybody should see and be a part of.
Thank you, Nabyl. Afrodet, you are coming from the traditional art world. You are traditionally educated. You worked in the traditional art world, and then you transitioned also early into the blockchain cryptosphere, and now you are not only creating NFT Now, but numerous other projects that are bringing both worlds together. How you see the benefit that the blockchain can actually bring to our traditional art and culture world?
Thank you. Actually, I want to expand on something Nabyl said, and it is, I was not really into art before the blockchain. And the reason I find this to be a sentiment that is repeated often again by digital art collectors, by NFT collectors, is because the art world is opaque. And it's opaque on purpose. We don't want you to see behind the curtains. I want to be able to make up an arbitrary price and charge you for that arbitrary price. And if you tell me you can find a Richard Prince for a lower price, I tell you to go buy that Richard Prince, because this is my price. And what's really, really interesting about the blockchain, and why people like Nabyl and many other collectors, because we're all collectors of something, right? Whether it's art or watches or shoes or people. What I found to be really interesting is, because the blockchain is transparent, you can go on the blockchain, you can see what a piece of art actually sold for, you can see who owns it, and all of a sudden, the more you study these things, the more that you realize, like, you too can be a collector of digital art. You too can understand. And what I've found to be really beautiful is buying digital art is a slippery slope into buying traditional art. And all of a sudden, so many of these digital art collectors have invested and supported and become patrons of traditional art. And what we're seeing is a breakdown of barriers. And I really, really love seeing that, because I want to get to a place where we stop saying traditional art and digital art. It's just art.
Another question after that to you. How important do you think is this infrastructure that was created? Because you said, like, it sounds seamless, the transition from digital art to non-digital art. But for this, we need also a certain technological environment, right?
Yes. So it's important to note that, one, digital art is not new, right? It's been around for decades. I'm going to shill for a second. So what's really cool is today, or yesterday at midnight, Christie's announced a really incredible collection of Keith Haring, digital works, never before seen. He made them on some computer called the Miyagi, right? And they found them, the Keith Haring Foundation, and they're selling them with Christie's. And so again, we've been creating digital art for decades. All the blockchain is doing is allowing us to have ownership, transparency, and also provenance, which is very, very important when it comes to art. And if you aren't aware, provenance just means the history of a work. Who made it, who bought it, who held it.
I mean, this is one of the biggest problems in the art world if you go back in art history to really establish, is this an original work? Is this a work that was done by the workshop or by the artist himself? So there's so many things that obviously the blockchain is solving, but maybe the biggest problem that is solved now for digital art and everything what you can reproduce, that we have suddenly a certificate of ownership. Yeah, it wasn't there before, because before the ownership was just the possession and the ownership of a thing, you know, that you could store somewhere. And now we created something that really allows to accumulate value, and that allows also the artist to say, like, I want that this certificate changes from my ownership, from that I generated it, to the hand of a collector. But there's another aspect to it. It's basically on the other side. It's the democratization, it's the accessibility. It's also like to widen the canvas for the artists that can reach much more people, a much wider audience. And Marc, as you obviously know, we are also one of the main investors, now the lead investor in Superblue. And Superblue is a big experiential art center in Miami. How do you think this whole trend of art going into the broader audience is supported by this new generation of infrastructure and art?
I mean, I think the traditional art market is based around singular objects. You know, the majority of artworks that are traded at fairs like the one going on COEX right now, Free Soul, the majority of artworks that come to auction are paintings. And the art market is built up around creating scarcity, sometimes manufactured, sometimes real. There is the opacity about where pricing comes from. There's an enormous opacity because, unlike stocks or real estate, where every transaction is registered in some sort of exchange or ledger, half of the art market doesn't have any sort of public record because it doesn't take place at auction. And even auction records, quite frankly, are tricky because not all auction sales are what they appear to be. Sometimes you have people that in essence own part of the work bidding against other people, because you have reserves. Sometimes you have what's called chandelier bidding, which is the auction house bidding something up without necessarily people behind it. Anyway, so what you have is a market where what's interesting right now is you have a culture clash between the next generation of collectors, which is frankly people like the people in this room, people coming out of digital technology, people coming out of fintech, for whom market building is done around transparency and scale. And the traditional art market is the exact opposite of that. It's built around opacity and exclusivity. And so what's really interesting for me, having spent 15 years being a central player within the traditional art market, is to think about how the next generation of patrons will engage. And I think the notion of democratizing art it's a little bit of a slippery phrase, because obviously as long as it's expensive, most people can't buy it. Yes, it's out there, but of course, if you're talking about singular objects, it's very difficult. That's why I think the huge drops that you would have with NFTs or the multiples that many artists have made are appealing not only to the collectors or would-be collectors who can finally afford it, but also to the artists. Because let's be honest, I think most artists are uncomfortable with the fact that most of their friends, and often they themselves, despite being successful artists, couldn't afford to own the work. And so the notion of having an art world where art can be experienced in the setting of immersive, large-scale installations, or can be bought in the context of either physical or digital or hybrid editions, allows the art world to be bigger. I mean, one of the really fascinating things about the art market is that in the last 15 years, the number of billionaires has gone like this. But the size of the art market has gone like that. So there's clearly a delta between the supply of collectors and the demand that that supply has failed to produce. And that was a complicated phrase, but basically the art market should be much bigger because there are many more people who could afford to buy art. And it's not. And my theory, which grows stronger and stronger the longer I'm away from my previous job, is that it's because there's a disconnect between the next generation of collectors and the market and the way that the market appeals to them. And it starts with the fact that you walk into a gallery and you come to a large marble desk and commonly you're not greeted. And that's just not a way to appeal to people who operate in a different kind of culture. So I mean, I think I see the digital infrastructures being created by a blockchain. I see immersive art experiences as part of a broader rethinking and recasting that the art world needs to do. And it will do so in some ways, like digging in its heels and begrudgingly, but it needs to be recast in order to be embraced by the next generation of patrons.
I mean, it's also a question of fluidity, right? So maybe I can open up the discussion between us a little bit, so you can also ask yourself questions and myself a question. But I would put it in the room that today we are much more symbiotic, much more interconnected, right? So when we talk today about the artists that are really cutting edge, they're not anymore, defined to one medium. Yeah, they want to do architecture and they want to do a small, basically, digital work that has 1 kilobyte, right? And this is like a very interesting perspective that goes actually back to the origins of art, where artists were Renaissance people, right? That were actually educated in all the different craftsmanships of their times.
Yeah, I mean, the history of how artists were defined is very, very broad. I mean, in the Greeks, actually, the best artists were not the most innovative, but the ones who were most able to copy previous artists. So it's been defined in many, many ways. If you look at sort of art coming from Africa, the art that we judge to be the most authentic is the stuff that actually had a real purpose, as opposed to the stuff that was made for aesthetic purposes to be sold. But certainly, I agree with you, and it's actually I would say relatively recent, because when I started getting involved with the art world 20 years ago, artists refused to be defined by making one type of art. Like, I'm not just a painter, I'm also a sculptor. And what's interesting now is that people don't just want to be artists, they also want to be film directors. Look at Steve McQueen, like one of the great video artists, and now an Oscar-winning person. Look at Zaha Hadid, who made art, but who also made architecture. And so I think the notion of being defined not just by one medium is no longer valid, but also not even just by one field.
I mean, Nabyl, you're a good example, because you basically evolved from the collector of sneakers to the collector of Refik Anadol.
Well, I think actually, to capitalize on what both of you are saying, I think the real crux of it is culture.
Yeah.
Right? Our entire culture is evolving, and people put culture to the side because they focus on the business. But I think what most people don't understand is culture actually drives business, right? So when, we're here at a blockchain conference talking about art, which 3 years ago, 4 years ago would never have happened, even though digital art was around, has been around for decades. But the reason that's possible is, we've had all these technological advancements, right? We joke about this all the time, but I say we're living in the most exciting period in human history. And people say, why? There's all these wars. And the human brain has not had an upgrade in 50 million years, right? But what we've been able to do over the last 30, 40, 50 years, and even before that, is build all these technologies that are now getting us to this point here today. So people think that, hey, the blockchain and digital art and crypto just appeared. No. Right? We needed all of these basic things to occur. We needed, if you just be more modern, you needed computing power to be faster. You needed storage space to get cheaper, right? You needed AI to kind of get to the point where it is, where now we're actually saying generative AI art is what we're displaying, right? So it's all driven by basically people wanting to participate in the world and that's through culture, right? So the reason I think this is, a different moment in time is, like you said, it's not just people being able to access it because it's easier. It's the artists themselves are being redefined, right? The good friend Chris Dixon, he has an essay about 1,000 fans, right? So, like before, even 10, 15 years ago, if you wanted to be a successful artist, or you either needed mass scale, and I don't mean just art, but like music, everything, right? Now you don't need to have mass scale, right? You need a small group of people that are very driven or committed to what you're doing, and all of a sudden you have super fans who are culturally motivated to actually make you successful, right? So I think we're living actually in a very unique period where artists are both consumers and creators, and the community actually drives value directly to the creator, right? Which is a very different model than the world has experienced for the last 100 years.
So I'm a little more romantic about this, and I think what the blockchain has done is it's returned us to patronage, and we have not had art patrons in a very long time. And when I talk about art patrons, at one point, it was churches that could afford to commission art that spoke to their disciples, because their disciples were mostly illiterate, right? And then it became the royal court that commissioned art, and the noble people. You think about the Mona Lisa, someone paid for that sitting, whether it's real or not, we're not sure. And now fast forward, and these artists now have patrons, because as a normal person who has access to the internet, you get to be a patron. If you collect Ferocious or Diana Sinclair or Drift, whoever it is you collect, guess what? They have your address, and they have access to you, and that access empowers them. It allows me to say, I am an artist, and the majority of my collectors live here. I am an artist, and more of my collectors collect this kind of photography that I do, this kind of digital renderings that I do, and allows you to really lean in, because this 1,000 fans is fantastic for musicians, fantastic for sports players, but unfortunately, up until the blockchain and the advent of NFTs and digital art, many artists were chosen by gallerists, right, by critics, and now suddenly we've returned to patronage, which is truly romantic in my opinion.
No, I mean, we see it with the drop Winds of Yawanawa, right? So imagine we have like sold out most of this drops. Every single batch was sold out. There's some small left that is basically pre-sold. And so we basically engaged with 1,000 people. Everyone gave $2,500 equivalent. And we collected all together with the three main works around over $3 million within a span of 1 month for a community in the Amazonian rainforest that had no money ever. They never had 1 million, 2 million, or like 3 million on an account, because they are a tribe of 2,000 indigenous people. So every buyer became patron basically of this community, and in the same moment already has a factor of 8 on the investment, right? So basically, this kind of relationships are really incredible, because they were patrons relationships, and this patronage system is also something, just to highlight shortly, that if we look at, cities or states like Venice, Venice was not, like a museum like today. Venice was the most powerful economical zone. It was like New York, right? It was the most powerful state. It had like the biggest armada. It was the biggest trading, merchant organizations. They're the biggest banks. But all what is left today is what was produced as culture. Nothing else. There's no armada left, there's no banks from Venice, and there's also no merchant organizations. So culture at the end is where we are storing our value.
Afrodet pointed out previously a lot of the benefits that the blockchain has in terms of creating transparency around pricing, transparency around provenance. But one thing we haven't talked about, and what you raised before is important, is one thing that artists don't have right now is any kind of benefit from the resale of their work. And there are laws in place which are hard to enforce. And I think one of the really great things would be, for example, if Richard Prince, when you have a 33,000% appreciation, every time that work is sold would benefit from it. Because in essence, he's the one that created the image. And I think one of the holy grails for the art market, and actually one of the things which I hope will eventually convince galleries and artists to think more progressively around the blockchain and its possibilities, is the possibility for artists to really benefit. Because what we have is a kind of creator economy where the creators benefit the least, because basically they put things into play, and when the market goes up, you know, the artist and the galleries put things into play, and when the market goes up, the artist often doesn't benefit, or generally doesn't benefit, and then other galleries come in and get involved. So I think the possibility for creators to benefit more is really strong. It's one of the, for me, is really actually the most interesting way in which the blockchain could transform the art market.
Could I expand upon that?
Absolutely.
If you're unaware, if you are an artist and you sell me your work for $5,000 and I turn around and I flip it for 20, you see zero commission, you see zero royalties from that. And so a lot of us in the traditional space jumped on board to Web3 because royalties were built in, and now those royalties are at risk. And it's a really scary place that we're in now, that these artists who deserve royalties, in the UK, it's the law to give artists royalties, and yet many countries that is not enforced, that is not upheld.
So there's another thing to this topic, and it's purpose and ethics. Yeah, I think the transparency element of the blockchain also creates a completely different, visibility for not only the question of royalties, not only the question of pricing and market, but also what actually is the content of the artwork. Yeah? Because if we talk about art as the root of all culture, and we look around us, we see that our culture has provided very hostile environments. Our culture has provided almost a sick city. We have like a mental health crisis. We have like, so in a way, our culture is in a difficult situation, and we need to highlight the ethical part of everything what we are doing. Is it really necessary? Is the resources that we are using really necessary? Is the outcome better than if we wouldn't do what we are doing? So in a way, this kind of transparency, this kind of visibility is also fantastic for me. So I would like to ask you, where do you see this going? Where you see it in 5, 10, and maybe 20 years to be?
So we talk about accessibility, right? And yes, to Marc's point, the majority of artworks cannot be purchased by the majority of humans alive. But what's interesting and beautiful about blockchain is you can still see it digitally, right? Even if Rafiq's work wasn't out here in this grand, beautiful landscape, you could just go online and you can see it. And that's really special, being able to create things to share with people, to improve people's lives, to challenge them. You know, we all love a PFP project. We love these little characters. They're great. But how are they genuinely improving your life? How are they challenging you to explore? How are they provoking you to think differently about the world?
I mean, I think what we're talking about here is narratives. You know, humans are driven by meaning and by narrative. And I think the narrative of speculation, which frankly is what drove the NFT hype, which then collapsed, not surprisingly, is not a durable narrative. Speculation is not a durable narrative. I think what art does is it creates with people at a deeper level. And great art has real meaning. And that was one of the things that made me suspicious of the NFTs, is not only did I find them aesthetically boring and derivative, but also I just didn't see why they existed, you know? And I think the beauty of art, and this will be interesting as AI comes more and more into this, the beauty of art is that you somehow or other access the artist's personality and their meaning and their narrative. And I think no matter what happens, narratives are what drives humans. And I think the narratives that develop around the art will be essential, you know, whether it's art that's physical or digital, whether it's on the blockchain or on a piece of canvas.
Sure.
I think I would just to just provide a different perspective is there's a saying in crypto like you're still early, right? Yeah. And I think what most people don't realize is even globally, there's less than 100 million wallets, right, that are out there, right? So when you talk about culture and you talk about change and you talk about like this narrative, you know, I feel like we're so we're still at an infancy stage that I think the whole narrative shifts. And if we were to have this conversation 12 or 18 or 36 months, it would be dramatically different, right? So, you know, I think we have to be aware that it's being built out in the open, right? And I think people mistake privacy and anonymity, like on the blockchain and with the art. And so I think we're going to run into a lot of different dilemmas. But with every new technology, there's always been challenges, right? So yes, we needed the NFT period to actually get to this point where now we're doing generative AI art and it's actually being showcased, in museums, right? So I think that's the way I would frame it, is that we're early, but it's coming quickly, right? If you think about exponential technology, if I asked you to take 30 steps around this room, you'd probably get from here to the door. But if I said, take 30 exponential steps, where each step is doubling, you would go around the Earth 26 times. And that's the scale at which everything is moving right now in this space. So I think we're going to have a very different conversation very soon.
Very different, very soon. And I also want to say that, culture was always about purpose. So this is why most of the culture was about religion. We always believed that, every of our action is somewhere recorded. This is still a private belief, but we can be sure that today, with AI upcoming, every of our action is recorded. That's for sure. Thank you very much for this panel. Big round of applause for the panelists. And our time is up.